Present.
Leander Clark Harvey, David Higgins,
Here.
Steve Julesgard,
Here.
Rich Lahara,
Here.
Dave Martin. We had Dave. We'll come back to him. Christine Miaskowski,
Present.
Lauren Miller Rogan,
Here.
Adriana. Oh, thank you. Adriana Padilla,
Here.
Joe Panetta,
Here.
Al Rolette,
Present.
Jonathan Thomas,
Here.
Art Torres,
Here.
Carol Watson.
Here.
Thank you. We have quorum.
Thank you, Maria. Before we get to the action items, Al, Steve, or Gil, do you want to make any preliminary comments?
It would just be considered gloating, so no.
I agree with my colleague, Mr. Julesgard.
Thank you. Gil, any comments?
No comments from me. Thank you, though.
Well, the only comment I have is in today's Chronicle, they had a wonderful story on two young winemakers who are picking grapes from old Italian vineyards outside the Dodger Stadium.
Is that using stem cells?
Yes, has to be.
And the comment is accepted. It's not out of bounds.
Okay, now that we got that out of the way, thank you, Art. Move on to the action items. First one is consideration of applications submitted in response to program announcement for the Cirm Scholar Research Training Awards, the so-called Education 4 Awards. First have a presentation from Gil.
Yes, so good morning, everyone. I just need to share my screen. What it's giving me. Oh, sorry, it's not doing it. Give me a second.
Gil, do you want us to get the one that's posted on the website up and running?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know why this computer's not doing
Okay.
it.
Hey, Doug, can you grab that?
Not at all.
Yeah,
getting it.
Not at all.
How do I quiet this?
No, I'm not here to tell you. Got it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Doug. Can you go on to the next slide? So these are the recommendations from the grants working group as it pertains to the research training program for the Cirm Research Scholars. And so this slide just to remind everybody that we continue to fund opportunities across all of our pillars from discovery, translation, clinical, and infrastructure, and in this case, education. On the next slide is a reminder of the different types of programs that we support under the education pillar. So we support everything from high school through clinical fellows. Recently, we had the Bridges program that got relaunched, and we're in the process of launching those new awards. There were 15 for the Bridges program that were relaunched. We have applications in for the Spark High School program. And of course, this program that we're going to be talking about today is the research training that covers pre-doctoral, postdoctoral, and clinical fellow awards. From a historical perspective, we've supported these types of programs in the past from 2006 through 2016, in particular for the Research Training Awards. The objective was to create a diverse cadre of scientists with knowledge and skill in stem cell research that we term Cirm scholars, again, targeting PhD students, postdocs, and MDs. And so each institution under this old program offered a single integrated program of training that was appropriate for the educational levels that they offered at their own institution. So if, for example, they had a graduate program, they could then offer to train PhD students, or if they had a medical school or a clinical program, they could offer to train clinical MDs. And so those were offered up until 2016. I think the last one closed in 2017. We didn't renew the program at that point. I think in terms of assessing priorities of Cirm at the time with the tail end of Prop 71 funds, we determined that we would not issue another cycle of those. But now that we are relaunching programs, we decided to go forward with a new program. So the next slide, please. This is still historical information. This is just to show a general map of the distribution of programs that we had in the past, which covered from north to south California. Next slide, please. That program trained about 940 scholars and had mostly postdoctoral fellows, but a high representation of PhD students and MDs as well. The research that was conducted by these trainees during the course of their tenure, usually about 2 to 3 years, was over 1,000 publications that cited specifically support from the training grant program. And we did a survey in 2013 out of 430 or so. We learned that 56% of the trainees at the time, once they finished, continued on to further training, which I think makes sense for many of them, particularly the pre-doc students. 14% advanced to academic research faculty positions, 10.5 advanced to an industry position, and 12 advanced to some other type of position, such as teaching or medical practice. Next slide, please. So for the 2021 Cirm Scholars Training Program, we opened this up to California universities and colleges and nonprofit academic research institutions as we did before. The board approved up to $100 million to support up to 20 awards, and each award provides up to $5 million for up to 5 years for the program. And this support can be for any combination of pre-doc, postdoc, or clinical trainees as is appropriate for the institution. So now into the way the grants working group scored these and assessed these. The scoring system that was used for this was on a scale of 1 to 100, with 85 to 100 being a recommendation to fund. Anything below that is not recommended for funding. Next slide, please. The review criteria that were used are the following. Does the proposed program hold the necessary significance and potential for impact, meaning what value it provides overall and what impact it'll have on the trainees? Secondly, is the training program well planned and designed? Is it practical and achievable? And finally, do they have a track record and outcomes from a prior training program, whether Cirm or otherwise, that demonstrates success? Next slide, please. And so this is a summary of the GWG recommendations related to this program. We had 18 applications that were submitted. There were 18 that were recommended for funding for a total applicant request of about 86 or just over 86 million. And since we have 100 million available, we are certainly within the budget to fund all of the ones that are recommended. The Cirm team recommendation is to fund all 18 projects that have a score of 85 or greater. So that is the slide presentation. And if you could put up the Excel sheet if you have it, that shows the listing of the programs. Thank you. So as you can see, all of the programs were recommended for funding and scored between 85 and up to 98 in terms of the range of scores. Mr. Chairman, that's it for me for now.
Thank you very much, Gil. Do we have a motion to, we're going to vote in mass here, a motion to approve the 18 recommended programs for funding?
I so move, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Is there a second?
Second, this is Al Roulette.
Thank you, Al. Questions or comments from members of the board?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Isabel.
Hello, Isabel.
Good morning, everybody. A couple of questions here, although I did see some comments or remarks later on vis-a-vis a few of the programs. What I'd like to see us add, Gil, even on criteria number 5, is a tracking of DEI along these programs, so that we're asking them to give us data so that we can know that in fact they're growing within the complement of docs and postdocs, et cetera, or whatever stage of education they're at, that they're actually increasing the numbers of representatives and students from communities of color where they're underrepresented, particularly at the PhD level. And so that we can begin to address how are we going to grow the ability for these young kids to not only come into these training programs, but succeed in these training programs. I'm not, in my mind, getting enough feedback. And I know that Gil addressed it at one point. I want to see what percentage of diversity is represented in each of these programs and how they're showing progression over time, that they are deliberately and intentionally taking steps to improve the recruitment and supporting success of these students as they go through these programs, processes, projects. So we're going to get representation throughout the state with some equality over time. I mean, this is basically a minority majority state, and we need to make sure that these students are here, represented, learning, and able to move the state forward in stem cell and all other research. So I think we need some more clarity, maybe more definitive on our criteria as I'm viewing this. And I don't know if now's the time to actually bring it up, but I just felt that I needed to say that.
No, that's an excellent question, and it's an important element that we did incorporate for this particular cycle, because one of the things that we wanted to ensure, although in the past we have tracked the racial, ethnic, and gender diversity of trainees. Each trainee that's appointed, we have an appointment form for them so that we can track a lot of this information. But we made it a point, and it was part of what was assessed by the GWG, was not only their track record, but their plans for how they will diversify the cohort of students that come in and how they will track. And so you may see in some of the summaries, some of the critiques from reviewers related to how good their plan is, or in some cases, that it needs work. So it is an important element that we've incorporated. One of the other things that we want to do is also, and this was recommended by the GWG, to find a way to establish best practices among the programs. So there is the benefit of having all of these programs where the program directors can learn from one another and share best practice information. And I think a lot of that may come from having joint meetings with them, as well as just our ongoing monitoring of these programs. So it's a great question and something that we are thinking about certainly as we move forward with these programs.
A follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Certainly.
What I think I'd really love to see, Gil, though, is I'd like to see it on paper in a report. I mean, so I can stop guessing about how well we're doing, and also allow the public at some point in time if they have access to see how well we're doing in making sure that there is in fact diversity represented for the students and the access to be able to train in these kinds of programs. The other thing that someone doesn't want me to talk. Sorry. The other thing I wanted to see, because I saw the geographic map of which institutions are engaged, and it's very coastal. What are we doing to bring in Central Valley and other colleges and or universities there where there's a lot of underrepresentation, I think, in our funding, and our research, as well as our student opportunities to get engaged. Even if we have the institutions in terms of big best practices, talk about Big Brother kinds of programs where they will reach out to an institution that is not represented and see if they can't bring some of their students to co-partner in the program, or other academics to co-partner with them in a research project. I just worry that we're losing, in fact, some of that diversity by not bringing in some of these institutions, the state colleges and the middle of the valley institutions. I don't know if anybody else, maybe Adriana Padilla might have some ideas about that as well. I'm just concerned.
Yes, Isabel, this is Adriana. I totally agree. I think it's been a challenge to bring in folks from or institutions from the Valley. And I'm not sure if they're just not getting the information, if they're just not being encouraged. But I like your idea of the Big Brother philosophy of having institutions from big cities where usually the medical schools are located, reach out to Inland Empire, Central Valley, North Frontier areas for the community colleges or the state institutions to get involved. I don't know what else to do except for really do more reach out, more information, more Big Brother type of activities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Isabel, for that suggestion. Adriana, for your comments. I think that is a very good idea. This is an outstanding program. We've seen from Gil's stats from the earlier iteration, the tremendous value this adds to our continuum of education programs. So the more we can do to encourage representation throughout the state, clearly the better. So thank you, Isabel, for raising that point. Other comments or questions from members of the board?
Sort of along the lines of the issue that Isabel's raising, I'm wondering, and maybe this is for another time, how do institutions that provide training learn of this opportunity? It seems like that would be part of the kind of outreach necessary to diversify the cadre of students being engaged, but it starts with the institution knowing about the funding and going through the process. And I'm unfamiliar with what Cirm does to market these opportunities throughout the state to various institutions, both clinical and research oriented.
Gil, would you like to answer that, please?
Sure. So, I mean, we issue a solicitation for these where we can. We certainly we do sort of we have a listserv and do a bulk email out to different institutions to make them aware of these opportunities. I think also within each program, one of the things that we encourage and will continue to do so as we monitor them is to partner with other institutions throughout California in terms of diversifying their cohort of students and to do outreach themselves in recruiting pre-docs, postdocs, and medical fellows. So I think it's both before they apply and becoming aware of this, but I think also even once we fund each of these programs, there are ways in which we can support them and encourage them to do more outreach that may allow a greater diversification of their student populations.
My question was more how do the, for lack of a better term, PIs on these requests know that such a funding opportunity is available?
Right. And so what we do is we do email blasts out to different institutions to let them know. So a lot of it is really, reaching out to people that we know, but I think, there may be better ways of doing it that we are happy to consider in terms of how to improve the outreach to other institutions that maybe aren't getting the word.
So if we have someone who's interested, is it reasonable for us to refer them to you to add their name on to the list?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments from members of the board?
Yes, one other way to reach out is through the Chancellor's office for the community colleges and for the President's office for the state university system. Their PR people might be of help, and I don't know whether your shop is doing that or not, Gil. You may be. So just as a suggestion.
This is Dave Martin. I'm echoing, but try not to. I think this, sorry.
Dave, you might be still on your phone and your computer at the same time.
Turn the phone off, Dave. That should help.
Let's try it again. My phone is off. Maybe I can't hear you. Anyway, at the planning session, when was it, week before last, that we had on the neuro data intensity and AI, et cetera, there was a question asked that I thought was really pertinent, and I don't recall who asked it, but was, with this program that we were considering, provide a legacy for Cirm? And there was quite a bit of discussion around that. And I tried to make the comment on that, and I was having problems even being heard, even with an echo. And I think, and my comment was that I believe that, and this is a good point, this spreadsheet, that the biggest legacy for Cirm is going to be its educational programs, because those are going to persist far longer than the more senior trained people in institutions, professors, et cetera. This training program, and this is one of the most, I guess, prolific one and well-funded one, is really important to Cirm. And Gil's data shows how important it is just in terms of numbers.
Agreed. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Art, for that suggestion. That was an excellent suggestion. Other questions, comments from members of the board? Any comments from members of the public? Maria, do we see any public comment?
We do not.
Okay, will you please then call the roll?
Dan Bernal.
Aye.
As a reminder, if you have a conflict, please respond yes or no, except for those of which I have a conflict. Anne-Marie Dulage, Isabelle Dudon,
Yes.
Mark Fisher Colbury,
Aye.
Fred Fisher,
Yes.
Elena Flowers,
Yes, except those for which I have a conflict.
Leander Clark Harvey, David Higgins,
Yes.
Steve Julesgard,
Yes.
Rich Lahara,
Yes.
Dave Martin, David, okay, Christine Miaskowski,
Yes, except for those with which I have a conflict.
Lauren Miller, Rogan,
Yes.
Adriana Padilla,
Yes.
Joe Panetta,
Yes.
Al Roulette,
Aye.
Jonathan Thomas,
Yes.
Art Torres,
Aye, except for those of which I am conflicted.
Carol Watson.
Yes, except for those with which I have a conflict.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you, Maria. On to action item number 2, number 4 on the agenda, consideration of applications submitted in response to clinical trial stage projects program announcement, CLINS 1, 2, and 3, presentation from Gil.
Thank you, Doug. Could you put up the slides for the clinical program? Thank you. Next slide, please. So these are the recommendations from the grants working group on the latest cycle of our clinical program. And just a reminder of overall of the program, the clinical stage opportunity is available for projects that are late stage preclinical, that are doing IND enabling work. That's the CLIN 1. There's also the opportunity to support the completion of a clinical trial itself. That's the CLIN 2 program. And then supplemental funds for accelerating activities. That's the CLIN 3 program. Next slide, please. So this is a view of our budget that was allocated, and it is allocated on an annual basis by the board for the clinical program. There was 162 million that was dedicated to support clinical programs. The amount that's requested for the one application that's being considered today is about 12 million. We have 31 million in approved awards from the last cycle that included, I think it was 3 applications. And we have about 119 remaining, assuming that today's application is approved. Next slide, please. So the review criteria that are utilized by the grants working group to assess clinical programs are these 5 basic questions. Does the project hold the necessary significance and potential for impact? Meaning, what is its value and is this worth doing? Does it have a sound rationale? Is it well planned and designed? Is it feasible, including do they have all the available resources and appropriate individuals included on their team? And then finally, does the project address the needs of underserved communities? Next slide, please. The scoring system for clinical applications uses a system of 1, 2, or 3, something with a score of 1.
Am I the only one that lost
Exceptional
Gil's
merit.
sound?
Excuse me? Okay, so a score of 1 means exceptional merit and warrants funding. A score of 2 means that it needs improvement, and typically those applications go back to the applicant for revision and gets a revisit by the grants working group at the next available cycle, or a score of 3 in which it is sufficiently flawed and doesn't warrant funding at this time. Next slide, please. So elements in the Cirm application, there's a couple of them that I just want to mention that are related to diversity in general. One is addressing the needs of underserved communities. That's an element that has been incorporated into our applications and into the review process now for well over a year. And so this section describes the applicant's plan for outreach and enrollment of a diverse patient cohort that accounts for racial, ethnic, and gender diversity. And the section is evaluated as part of the overall project, and it's incorporated into the scientific merit score. So the score you see of 1, 2, or 3 has incorporated the elements of enrollment and outreach plan and so on by the scientific members of the GWG. In addition, we also have a diversity, equity, and inclusion section, which describes how the applicant team incorporates diverse perspectives and experiences to improve the project through the composition of the team itself, through their training, and any other approaches that they may have to include and show a commitment to DEI. And this section is evaluated and scored by the patient advocate and/or nurse members of the board, and shown in the DEI score, which ranges from 0 to 10, with 10 being the best possible score for DEI. Next slide, please. So this is the specific application that's under consideration. It is CLIN 2 12563, and this is a T-cell immunotherapy for patients with hematologic malignancies. And so the therapy itself is a cell therapy product. It's an allogeneic T cells that are enriched for regulatory T cells that are infused following hematopoietic stem cell transplant. The indication is for any hematologic malignancy that requires the HSCT transplant in order to follow up. The goal of this clinical trial is to complete a phase 1/1B trial and select a phase 2 dose to assess safety and initial efficacy. The funds requested for this trial are just under 12 million. Next slide, please. So a little background on the indication. So hematologic malignancies are things such as acute leukemias, lymphomas, that are most common in children and young adults. The current standard of care, particularly for the high risk or refractory cancers of this type, is chemotherapy, and maybe followed by allogeneic hematopoietic stem cell transplant that could offer a cure. However, there is often a lack of matched donors, as well as a high risk of rejection or graft versus host disease, where the graft or the transplant, because it has immune cells, can actually attack the patient itself. The proposed therapy offers the opportunity for greatly improving outcomes for patients that are undergoing hematopoietic stem cell transplant by reducing the incidence of the graft versus host disease and providing an opportunity for reconstitution of the immune system to help prevent infection and maybe even have anti-tumor effects. Why is this a stem cell project? This is the therapeutic candidate is manufactured from CD4 positive T cell progenitor cells, and it is also combined with a hematopoietic stem cell transplant as a combination product. Next slide, please. So in terms of similar projects in our portfolio, this is a pretty unique project, although we have other projects that propose cell therapies for different types of cancers. We don't have an accompanying immunotherapy that's aimed at reducing graft versus host disease specifically. Next slide, please. And this applicant does not have previous Cirm funding. Next slide. And so the summary of the review is as follows. The recommendation from the GWG is to fund. It received a score of 1 with a unanimous vote from the grants working group members. The DEI score had a median score of 9 from the patient advocate and nurse members. The Cirm team recommendation is to fund this application. Grants working group recommendation for a total award amount of under 12 million. Mr. Chairman.
JT, you're on mute.
Yeah, I just unmuted. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Isabel and Al. Are there questions or comments from members of the board?
Mr. Chair, Isabel, may I have a moment?
Yes.
First of all, Gil, I did note on this that you added in the DEI comments or score from the patient advocates, and I'd always like to hear what those are in this sort of thing. I appreciated the notes and why they felt this was a strong application. Second of all, I just read an article from Loma Linda University looking at ALL in Latino kids, and apparently they have a much higher incidence and mortality rate of ALL than any other group. And I've noted, and over the years, I've seen an increasing amount of pediatric cancer in the Latino population. And because we're also a much younger population than non-Hispanic white, it really becomes important to start to intervene as we can in the younger population. And I appreciated this particular grant for that reason and with that knowledge. But I think it's also crucial to note that this is the exact reason why we need to be very cognizant of impacts of these different cancers on communities of color, because I dare to say that if you go into some low-income Latino populations where they're Spanish speaking and you start talking about CAR T cells, and please join in our study, they're not going to understand a thing you say. And therefore, I think it's very necessary to make sure that along with doing this wonderful research, that the educational materials in English and Spanish and other languages as necessary are made available so that the patients and the patient families can perfectly understand what's going on, why this is happening, and how it can impact their child. Otherwise, I don't think that we as Cirm are doing as good a job as we can to inform both the public and the patients that we're trying to serve here. So I really appreciate this particular grant. So I'm all for it, but I'd like some of that additional information to be sure to go back to this particular researcher to make sure that they're doing all they can to inform the public and the patients and the families they're working with on this in a manner in which they will understand why and what.
This is Dave Martin. I have a couple of questions. Can you hear me at this point?
Yes.
Okay, so my first question is, or just a clarification, my understanding is this is not a CAR T. This is not an engineered cell. It's a cell that is differentiated from CD4 precursor cells. Is that correct, Gil?
Yes, that's correct. So it's not in any way genetically manipulated.
Right. And my second question is whether the donor for the stem cell transplant is the same donor for these in this enriched population of Tregs.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I was looking for that myself, and I'm not sure whether that's the case or not. I don't know if Gwg or one of the other folks at Cirm knows the answer to that, whether the population is from the same donor for the HSC.
I think that's important because at least you can reduce the probability of a rejection of one component and not the other.
Correct.
I may.
So we have, excuse me, we have the PI on the line. So JT, if you would like them to answer, that would be, that's an option right now. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer. So the cells are from the donor of the hematopoietic stem cell transplant. They are differentiated in vitro, and they contain the regulatory type 1 cells from the same donor.
Very good.
Thank you.
I feel better about that, and I suspect the patient will as well.
And I say, Mr. Chair, thank you to David for correcting me on my slight or less than high knowledge about stem cells. So thank you for the correction, Dave.
Thanks to both of you. Maria, I saw there was another hand up presumably on that question, although I don't see it anymore.
I think
Yes.
the question was answered.
Okay.
Yeah, I just would like to add, since it was very appropriately raised the point about the communication in the right language, that all our informed consent are fully translated in Spanish for sure, because the Latino population is our main population. And an in-person interpreter is always present when we discuss this with the family. So you can be sure that the understanding is very clear.
And of course, you provide the Italian translation, right?
Yeah, yes, that's simultaneous.
May I say, sometimes translation alone is not enough. There are cultural nuances that need to be addressed, even in consenting in. So I'm sure that you're doing that, and perhaps you have additional information that you can share over time for other researchers who need to know that a translation in and of itself doesn't always get the job done for understanding.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you all for your comments. Other comments or questions from members of the board?
I think that was an important issue that Isabel just cited. And if you could just explain a little bit more so the rest of the participants understand what you mean by cultural nuances, because it is an important issue.
Mr. Chair, shall I?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Well, Art, thanks for putting me on the spot here. But this is an issue that we have been trying to raise for quite a few years now about simple translations for other communities, even from English to English, is really important to understand the community and how it understands things, the language it uses, and how it interprets the meanings of words and phrases. So some things to one set of people may mean something else, or it opens up a whole new set of questions that need to be answered before that person feels that they truly understand what is being discussed. And so I know over time, when we worked very specifically in education with Latino Spanish-speaking populations, and those perhaps who have even a lower, either low literacy and or low education, that we need to be very clear and very specific that they understand what we're saying. Not that we, because we did it in Spanish and we gave them a document in Spanish, that everything is fine. It is really critical. And some work I've done on even with media and communication, trying to get more vaccine uptake in Spanish-speaking communities, that there are multiple channels of communications that bombard and cause in somewhat chaotic response in terms of understanding which is right, which is real, which do I understand, and how do I understand it. And so communication in and of itself becomes a really important skill set that I think researchers need to understand and develop in speaking to diverse communities, to make sure not that you think they know what they say, but they tell you they understand what you mean. Very critical difference. Thank you, Art.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Other questions? And by the way, that's why you're chair of the Communications Subcommittee. Any other comments or questions from members of the board? Any other public comment? Hearing none, Maria, will you please call the roll?
Dan Bernal,
Aye.
Isabel Dudon,
Aye.
Mark Fisher Colbury,
Aye.
Fred Fisher,
Yes, aye, whatever.
Elena Flowers,
Aye.
David Higgins,
Yes.
Steve Julesgaard,
Yes.
Rich Lahara,
Yes.
Dave Martin,
Yes.
Christine Miskowski,
Yes.
Lauren Miller Rogan,
Yes.
Adriana Padilla,
Yes.
Joe Panetta,
Yes.
Al Rolette,
Aye.
Jonathan Thomas,
Yes.
Art Torres,
Aye.
Carol Watson.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you very much. That concludes the action items on today's agenda. We're now into public comment on any and all topics. Do we have any public comment?
I do not see any.
Thank you, Maria. Having heard at the outset of this meeting from Steve, Al, and Gil, I would be remiss if I didn't give the last word to Joe Panetta and his thoughts on the performance of his team this season.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I was afraid you might do that. All that I can say about the performance of this team this season is that everyone here in San Diego expected that this was the year, as we do each year. And each year down here in San Diego, we just don't seem to get there. So I'm just going to tell you, we'll be back next year.
Okay, thank you very much. And hopefully you will avoid sinking below the 500 mark, which you're flirting with at the moment.
Yeah, gosh.
Okay, that concludes today's meeting. Maria, please, what is the date for the October meeting, which will be a full quarterly meeting of the board?
October 19th.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Lots of great comments today. Thank you, Gil and team, as always. Thank you for Maria and Doug and Tricia for facilitating. And we will see everybody in October, as well as some of you prior to that on the governance subcommittee, which is coming up shortly. So thank you very much. And we will call this meeting adjourned.